beneath the ancient mountains of West Virginia, where the fog clings to the hollows and the coal seems run like black veins through the earth, there are secrets that were never meant to be unearthed. In these forgotten coal camps, the ground is soaked with more than just rain. It's heavy with the memories of men who vanished, of voices that still echo in the tunnels, and of shadows that move when no one is watching. Tonight, I'll drag you into the pitch-black heart of these haunted hills, where every creak, every whisper, and every chilling scream is a warning from the past. These are not just stories. They are confessions from those who barely escaped with their sanity, and from some who never escaped at all. As you listen, you'll feel the cold breath of the mines on your neck, and you'll wonder if something is watching you from the dark. Are you brave enough to hear the most disturbing true horrors ever buried in West Virginia's coal country? Don't look away. The darkness is listening. I never believed in ghosts, not really. Not until the summer of 1997, when I took a job at Black Hollow Camp, deep in the coal country of West Virginia. I was 19, broke, and desperate for work. The camp was a cluster of battered shacks and a few old trailers, all huddled around the mouth of a mine that had been running since the 1920s. The air always smelled like wet earth and coal dust, and the hills pressed in so close it felt like the world ended at the tree line. I'd heard stories, of course. Every coal camp has them, but the men at Black Hollow were different. They didn't just tell stories, they believed them. They'd lower their voices at night, glancing over their shoulders, and talk about the whispers that came out of the mine after dark. I thought it was just superstition, a way to pass the time, but I was wrong. My first week was uneventful, just long hours and aching muscles. I bunked with a guy named Ray, a wiry old-timer with a face like a dried apple. He worked the mine for decades, and he had a way of looking at you that made you feel like he could see right through you. One night after a long shift, Ray and I sat outside our shack, sharing a bottle of cheap whiskey. The cicadas were screaming in the trees, and the moon was just a sliver above the hills. "You hear him yet?" Ray asked, his voice low. "Hear what?" I said, thinking he meant coyotes or maybe the wind. "The whispers," he said, staring at the mine entrance. "They come out after midnight, always have. My daddy heard him and his daddy before him." I laughed it off, but Ray just shook his head. "You'll hear him. Everybody does sooner or later." That night I lay in my bunk listening. At first all I heard was the usual, the creak of the shack, the distant hum of the generator, the soft snoring of the other men. But as the clock crept past midnight, I started to notice something else, a faint, almost musical sound like voices carried on the wind. I told myself it was just my imagination, or maybe the wind whistling through the mine shaft. But the sound grew clearer, and soon I could make out words. Not English, not any language I knew. Just a low, urgent whispering, rising and falling like a chant. I sat up, heart pounding. The whispers seemed to be coming from the mine, drifting through the open window like a cold draft. I wanted to wake Ray, but something held me back. I lay there, frozen, until the whispers faded with the first light of dawn. The next morning, I asked Ray about it. He just nodded like he'd been expecting it. "They're getting bolder," he said. "Used to be, you only heard them if you went near the shaft at night. Now they come right up to the camp." I tried to laugh it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, just beyond the tree line. A few nights later, things got worse. One of the men, a big guy named Tommy, went missing. He'd been drinking, and everyone figured he'd wandered off into the woods to sleep it off. But when he didn't show up the next day, we started searching. We found his flashlight near the mine entrance, the bulb smashed, but no sign of Tommy. That night, the whispers were louder than ever. They seemed to swirl around the camp, pressing against the walls of our shack. I lay in bed, sweating, listening to the voices. They sounded angry now, desperate. I could almost make out words, my name maybe, or something close to it. Ray sat up in his bunk, eyes wide. "Don't answer him," he whispered. "No matter what you hear, don't answer." I nodded, too scared to speak. The next day, the foreman called a meeting. He told us to stay away from the mine after dark and to stick together. But that night, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside our shack. I peeked through the window and saw Tommy, or what looked like him, standing by the mine entrance. His clothes were torn and his skin was pale as chalk. He was staring into the darkness, swaying back and forth. I wanted to call out, but Ray grabbed my arm. "That ain't Tommy," he hissed. "Don't you dare open that door." We watched as Tommy turned and walked into the mine, disappearing into the shadows. The whispers followed him, louder than ever. The next morning, the foreman found fresh footprints leading into the mine, but no sign of Tommy. The men were scared now, talking about quitting, but the foreman just told us to keep our heads down and do our jobs. I tried to focus on my work, but the whispers haunted me. They followed me everywhere, into the shower, the mess hall, even in my dreams. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, shapes moving in the shadows, faces peering out from the trees. One night I woke to find Ray gone. His bunk was empty, the sheets still warm. I ran outside, calling his name, but the camp was silent. I followed the sound of the whispers down to the mine entrance. The air was thick with fog and the moon was hidden behind the clouds. I saw Ray standing at the edge of the shaft, staring down into the darkness. The whispers were deafening now, swirling around him like a storm. "Ray," I shouted, but he didn't turn. He just stepped forward, disappearing into the mine. I ran after him, but the darkness swallowed me whole. The air was cold and damp, and the only sound was the whispers echoing off the walls. I stumbled through the tunnels, calling Ray's name, but all I heard was laughter, cold, mocking laughter that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I don't know how long I wandered in the dark. Hours, maybe. Days. Time didn't mean anything down there. I saw things, faces in the walls, hands reaching out from the shadows. The whispers grew louder, filling my head until I thought I would go mad. Finally, I saw a light, a faint, flickering glow at the end of the tunnel. I stumbled toward it, desperate for a way out. The light at the end of the tunnel was weak, barely more than a candle's glow, but it was enough to pull me forward. My boots scraped over loose gravel, echoing in the suffocating dark. The whispers pressed in on me, so loud now they felt like icy fingers digging into my skull. I kept my eyes fixed on that pale light, afraid that if I looked away, I'd be lost forever. As I got closer, I realized the light was coming from an old lantern, set on a rotting wooden crate. Next to it, hunched in the dirt, was Ray. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and wild, his face streaked with grime and tears. "Ray," I gasped, stumbling to my knees beside him. "We have to get out of here." He shook his head, clutching the lantern like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to this world. "They won't let us leave," he whispered. "They want us to stay. They're so lonely down here." I tried to pull him up, but he resisted, digging his heels into the dirt. "You don't understand," he said, his voice trembling. "They're the ones who never made it out. The ones the mine took. They whisper because they want us to join them." I felt a cold wind rush past us, carrying with it the stench of rot and something older, something that didn't belong in the world of the living. The whispers grew frantic, swirling around us in a language I couldn't understand, but the meaning was clear. "Stay. Stay with us." I grabbed Ray's arm and yanked him to his feet. "We're leaving," I said, my voice shaking. "Now." He stumbled after me, the lantern swinging wildly, casting twisted shadows on the walls. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning in ways I didn't remember. The whispers followed us, growing angrier, more desperate. I could feel them clawing at my back, trying to drag me down. At one point, the ground gave way beneath my foot and I nearly fell into a pit. Ray caught me, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't look down," he muttered. "That's where they wait." We pressed on, the lantern's light flickering. I could see the faint outline of the mine entrance ahead, a pale rectangle of moonlight. Relief surged through me, but it was short-lived. As we neared the exit, the whispers rose to a scream. Shadows lunged at us from the walls, their faces twisted in agony. I felt hands clutching at my clothes, cold and insistent. Ray cried out, stumbling, but I dragged him forward, refusing to let go. We burst out of the mine, collapsing on the ground outside. The night air was sharp and clean, and for a moment, all I could do was gasp for breath. The whispers faded, replaced by the chirp of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. Ray lay beside me, shaking. "They almost had us," he whispered. "They almost did." We staggered back to camp, filthy and exhausted. The other men stared at us, wide-eyed, but no one said a word. They knew. They'd all heard the whispers at some point, all felt the pull of the mine. The foreman called us into his office the next day. He looked tired, older than I remembered. "You boys are lucky," he said quietly. "Most who go in after dark don't come back." I wanted to quit right then, to pack my things and leave Black Hollow behind forever. But I needed the money, and there was nowhere else to go. So I stayed, like everyone else, and tried to ignore the whispers that haunted my dreams. But things were never the same after that night. Ray barely spoke, spending his days staring into the distance. The other men grew jumpy, quick to anger. The camp felt different, darker, heavier, as if the mine's hunger had grown. A few weeks later, another man disappeared. Then another. Each time, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. I started sleeping with the lights on, a Bible under my pillow, but it didn't help. The voices found me anyway, whispering secrets in the dark. One night, I woke to find Ray standing at the window, staring out at the mine. His eyes were empty, his face pale. "They're calling me," he said softly. "I have to go." I tried to stop him, but he slipped out into the night, vanishing into the fog. I never saw him again. After that, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my things and left Black Hollow, hitching a ride out of the hills. I never looked back. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the whispers, soft and insistent, calling me back to the darkness. And I wonder how many others have heard them, how many have answered. The mine is still there, hidden in the hills, waiting, and the whispers never stop. If you grew up in the coal camps of Fayette County, you probably heard about the Lantern Man. Folks in Red Ash whispered about him for generations, but I never believed any of it, until the winter of 1983, when I saw him with my own eyes. I was 23, just married and working the night shift at the Red Ash mine. My wife, Leela, and I had a tiny house on the edge of camp, close enough to the tracks that the coal trains rattled our windows every night. Money was tight, but we were happy, or as happy as you could be in a place like Red Ash. The Lantern Man was a story the old-timers told to scare kids. They said he was a miner who died in a cave-in back in the 1920s. His body never recovered. On foggy nights, he'd wander the hills with a lantern, looking for someone to take his place. If you saw his light, you were supposed to turn away and never follow it, no matter how lost you felt. I always thought it was just a tale to keep folks from wandering into the woods after dark. But that winter, something changed. The mine was running 3 shifts and the men were worn thin. Accidents started happening, tools going missing, carts derailing, strange noises echoing through the tunnels. Some of the men said they saw a light moving deep in the mine, where no one was supposed to be. One night I was working late, checking the ventilation fans near the old number 3 shaft. The air was thick with dust, and my headlamp barely cut through the gloom. I was alone, or so I thought, when I heard footsteps behind me, slow, dragging like someone limping. I spun around, shining my light down the tunnel. Nothing, just the endless black swallowing up the beam. I told myself it was just nerves, maybe a rat scurrying through the debris. But then I saw it, a faint, yellow glow bobbing in the darkness, too steady to be a reflection. I froze, heart pounding. The light moved closer, weaving between the timbers, casting long shadows on the walls. I could make out the shape of a man, tall and thin, holding an old-fashioned lantern. His face was hidden in shadow, but I could see the outline of a miner's helmet, caked with dirt. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The lantern man stopped a few yards away, raising his lantern. The light flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw his eyes, hollow, empty, burning with a cold blue fire. He didn't speak, but I heard his voice in my head, clear as day. "You don't belong here, not yet." The light went out and the tunnel was plunged into darkness. I fumbled for my headlamp, hands shaking, and when I finally got it working, the lantern man was gone. I stumbled back to the surface, gasping for air. The foreman found me outside the shaft, pale and shaking. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but he just shook his head. "You've been working too hard," he said. "Get some rest." But I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that lantern swinging in the dark. Leela tried to comfort me, but I could tell she was scared too. She started leaving the porch light on at night, and I caught her hanging a cross above the door. The next night, another man saw the lantern man. Then another. Each time the story was the same: a light in the darkness, a voice in their head, a warning to leave. Some of the men quit on the spot, packing up their families and leaving red ash behind. But I couldn't leave. We had nowhere else to go, and I needed the work. So I kept going back night after night, praying I wouldn't see that light again. One night, about a week later, I was working with my friend Earl, checking the pumps near the old flooded section. The air was damp and cold, and the water dripped from the ceiling like a leaky faucet. We were joking around, trying to keep our spirits up, when Earl stopped dead in his tracks. "Do you see that?" he whispered, pointing down the tunnel. I followed his gaze, and my blood ran cold. The lantern man was there, standing in the water, his lantern casting ripples of light on the walls. He didn't move, just stared at us with those empty eyes. Earl started to back away, but the lantern man raised his free hand, pointing straight at me. The air grew icy, and I felt a pressure in my chest, like something was squeezing the life out of me. "You don't belong here, not yet." The words echoed in my mind, louder this time, almost angry. Earl grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "Let's go, man, now." We ran, slipping on the wet stone, not daring to look back. When we finally reached the surface, we collapsed in the mud, gasping for breath. After that, I started noticing things around the house. The porch light would flicker for no reason. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find the lantern from my toolbox sitting on the kitchen table, even though I knew I'd left it in the shed. Leela said she heard footsteps outside at night, slow and dragging, like someone circling the house. I tried to tell myself it was just stress, that I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew the lantern man was getting closer. One night, I woke to the sound of glass breaking. I jumped out of bed, heart racing, and ran to the living room. The window was shattered and the cold wind howled through the gap. On the floor in the middle of the room was my lantern, lit, burning with a pale blue flame. Leela screamed and I grabbed her, pulling her back into the bedroom. We locked the door and huddled together, listening as footsteps creaked across the porch. The lantern man's voice echoed in my head, softer now, almost pleading. "You don't belong here, not yet, but soon." I didn't sleep at all that night. When the sun finally rose, I found muddy footprints leading from the porch to the woods behind our house. The lantern was gone. I knew then that I couldn't stay. The lantern man wasn't just a story, he was real and he wanted something from me. I told Leela we had to leave, that we'd figure something out. She didn't argue. But before we could pack, I had to go back to the mine one last time. I needed to face him to find out what he wanted. I couldn't run forever. So that night, I went back to the red ash mine, alone, carrying nothing but my headlamp and a prayer. I stood at the mouth of the red ash mine, the cold wind biting through my jacket. The camp was silent behind me, every window dark. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and stepped inside. The darkness swallowed me whole. My headlamp cast a weak circle of light on the damp stone. Every sound echoed, my boots crunching on gravel, the distant drip of water, the faint groan of old timbers. I forced myself to keep moving deeper into the mine, past the places where I'd seen the lantern man before. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe I thought if I faced him, he'd leave me alone. Maybe I just wanted answers. All I knew was that I couldn't let him haunt me and Leela any longer. The air grew colder as I walked, the darkness pressing in. I passed the old number 3 shaft, the spot where the first cave-in happened all those years ago. The timbers here were black with age, and the walls seemed to close in around me. That's when I saw it, a faint blue glow flickering at the end of the tunnel. My heart hammered in my chest, but I kept walking, drawn to the light like a moth to a flame. The lantern man stood in the middle of the tunnel, his back to me. His lantern swung gently from his hand, casting strange shadows on the walls. I could see the outline of his helmet, the torn remains of his work clothes, the mud caked on his boots. I stopped a few feet away, my breath clouding in the cold air. "What do you want from me?" I called out, my voice trembling. He didn't turn around. The lantern's light grew brighter, filling the tunnel with an eerie blue glow. I felt a pressure in my head, like someone was squeezing my thoughts. "You don't belong here, not yet." The words echoed in my mind, louder than ever. I swallowed hard. "Then why are you following me? Why won't you leave me and my wife alone?" The lantern man finally turned. His face was a hollow mask, eyes burning with that cold blue fire. He raised his lantern, and for a moment I saw flashes, images that weren't mine. Men trapped in the dark, gasping for air. The sound of rocks crashing down. The taste of blood and dust. Fear so thick it choked me. I staggered back, clutching my head. The lantern man stepped closer, his voice a whisper in my mind. I was left behind, buried, forgotten. The mind takes and it never gives back. You must remember us. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry, I didn't know I didn't." "You must remember." The words pulsed through me, filling me with a cold, aching sorrow. The lantern's light flared, and suddenly I was somewhere else, deep underground, trapped in a pocket of air, the walls closing in. I could hear the other men crying, praying, their voices fading one by one. I felt the weight of the earth pressing down, the hopelessness, the terror. Then just as suddenly I was back in the tunnel, gasping for breath. The lantern man stood before me, his eyes softer now, almost pleading. "Tell them, don't let them forget." The light faded, and the lantern man was gone. The tunnel was empty, silent except for my ragged breathing. I stumbled back to the surface, the first hints of dawn breaking over the hills. I felt different, older, heavier, as if I was carrying the weight of all those lost souls. I went home and told Leela everything. She listened, holding my hand, her eyes wide with fear and something else, understanding. We packed our things that morning and left red ash behind, never looking back. But I kept my promise. I told everyone I met about the lantern man, about the men who never made it out of the mine. I told their stories, made sure they weren't forgotten. Sometimes late at night, I still see that blue light flickering in the distance, hear the lantern man's voice in my dreams. "You don't belong here, not yet." I don't know what he's waiting for, or why he chose me. Maybe he just wanted someone to remember. Maybe he's still looking for someone to take his place. All I know is, if you ever find yourself near red ash on a foggy night, and you see a lantern swinging in the dark, turn away. Don't follow, and never forget the ones the mine left behind. If you ever drive Route 60 through Fayette County, you'll see a jagged ridge rising above the trees, like the spine of some ancient beast. Folks call it Devil's Backbone, and for as long as anyone can remember, it's been a place people avoid after dark. My family has been in these hills for generations, and I always thought the stories were just that, stories. But in the fall of 2004, I learned the truth about Devil's Backbone and the screaming shaft that still haunts my dreams. I was 28, working as a safety inspector for the old coal company. My job was to check the abandoned mines, make sure no one was sneaking in or getting hurt. Most of the shafts had been sealed for years, but there was one up on Devil's Backbone that kept causing trouble. Locals said it was cursed, that anyone who went near it after sundown would hear screams coming from deep underground. I didn't believe in curses. I figured it was just the wind, or maybe some animal trapped down there. So when my boss told me to check the shaft after a group of teenagers broke in, I didn't think twice. I grabbed my flashlight, my hard hat, and headed up the ridge just as the sun was setting. The hike up Devil's Backbone was rough, steep, rocky, and overgrown with brambles. The air was thick with the smell of wet leaves and coal dust. By the time I reached the old shaft, the sky was turning purple, and the woods were alive with the sounds of crickets and distant owls. The shaft itself was nothing special, just a rusted metal grate covering a black hole in the ground, surrounded by a ring of crumbling stones. Someone had pried the grate loose, leaving it half open. I shined my light down into the darkness, but the beam barely reached the bottom. I was about to radio in when I heard it, a faint, high-pitched wail echoing up from the depths. It sounded almost human but twisted, like someone screaming underwater. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I told myself it was just the wind, but the scream came again, louder this time, rising and falling like a siren. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I'd heard stories about miners getting trapped down there, about the shaft collapsing and burying men alive. Some folks said their spirits never left, that they screamed for help every night. I knelt by the edge, shining my light down, trying to see if anyone was down there. "Hello," I called, my voice shaky. "Is anyone there?" The scream stopped. For a moment there was only silence. Then from deep below I heard a voice, raspy, desperate, barely more than a whisper. "Help me." My heart pounded. I fumbled for my radio, but all I got was static. I tried again. "This is Inspector Carter up at Devil's Backbone. I think someone's trapped in the old shaft. I need backup." No response. Just more static, and then, faintly, the sound of breathing, slow, ragged, coming from the radio itself. I stood up, backing away from the shaft. The woods had gone silent, as if every animal was holding its breath. The air felt heavy, pressing down on me. I was about to leave when I heard footsteps behind me, slow, shuffling, crunching through the leaves. I spun around, shining my light into the trees. Nothing, just shadows and tangled branches. Then the scream came again, louder than before, echoing off the rocks. It sounded like a dozen voices all at once, crying out in pain and terror. I clapped my hands over my ears, stumbling back. Suddenly the ground beneath me gave way. I fell, tumbling down a steep slope, landing hard on a bed of wet leaves. My flashlight skittered away, its beam flickering. I scrambled to my feet, heart racing. I was at the bottom of a narrow ravine, the shaft looming above me. The screams had stopped, replaced by a low, guttural moan that seemed to vibrate through the ground. I grabbed my flashlight and started climbing back up, but the slope was slick with mud. Every time I got close to the top, I'd slide back down. The moaning grew louder, filling my head with a sense of dread. Then I saw something move at the edge of the shaft, a pale, twisted hand reaching out from the darkness, fingers clawing at the earth. I froze, unable to look away as the hand dragged itself up, followed by a face, gaunt, hollow-eyed, mouth stretched wide in a silent scream. I stumbled back, tripping over a root. The thing crawled out of the shaft, its body impossibly thin, skin stretched tight over bone. It moved with a jerky, unnatural motion, like a puppet with broken strings. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't work. The thing crawled toward me, its eyes locked on mine. I could hear its voice in my head, a chorus of whispers and screams. "Help us, don't leave us, it hurts." I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would go away. When I opened them, the thing was gone. The woods were silent again, the shaft empty. I scrambled up the slope, not daring to look back. When I reached the top, I slammed the grate shut and wedged a rock against it. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my flashlight. I started back down the ridge, but the screams followed me, echoing through the trees. Every shadow seemed to move, every gust of wind carried a whisper. By the time I reached my truck, I was soaked in sweat, my heart pounding. I tried the radio again, but all I got was static. I drove back to camp, barely able to keep my hands on the wheel. I told my boss what happened, but he just laughed. "You let those old stories get to you," he said. "There's nothing up there but rocks and raccoons." But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd heard. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, heard those screams. I tried to tell myself it was just a nightmare, but deep down I knew the truth. The next day I went back to Devil's Backbone, determined to prove I wasn't crazy. I brought a rope, a stronger flashlight, and a recorder. I wanted evidence, something I could show the others. I reached the shaft just before sunset. The woods were quiet, the air heavy with the promise of rain. I set up the recorder by the edge, tied the rope around my waist, and lowered myself into the shaft. The darkness swallowed me, thick and suffocating. My flashlight barely pierced the gloom. The walls were slick with moisture, and the air was cold and stale. I reached the bottom, my boots sinking into a layer of mud and debris. The silence was absolute, pressing in on me from all sides. Then from the darkness I heard it, a faint, shuddering breath followed by a whisper. "Help me." I froze, the whisper echoing off the damp stone walls. My flashlight trembled in my hand, the beam shaking across piles of broken timbers and rusted tools. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of old earth and something sour, like rotting meat. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself it was just a trick of the mind, maybe a draft whistling through the tunnels. But then I heard it again, closer this time. "Help me." It sounded like a man's voice, but warped, stretched thin by pain and time. I swallowed hard and called out, "Who's there? Are you hurt?" No answer, just the slow drip of water and the distant rumble of thunder above. I swept my light across the shaft, searching for any sign of life. That's when I saw the footprints, bare, muddy, leading deeper into a side tunnel that shouldn't have been there. The old maps never showed it, but the footprints were fresh, pressed deep into the muck. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But something pulled me forward, a mix of fear and curiosity I couldn't shake. I followed the prints, my boots squelching in the mud, the tunnel narrowing until I had to duck to keep from hitting my head. The air grew colder, the darkness thicker. My flashlight flickered, the batteries struggling. I could hear my own heartbeat loud in my ears. Then from up ahead came the scream, a raw animal sound that made my blood run cold. It was so loud, so full of agony that I dropped to my knees, hands over my ears. The scream faded, replaced by a chorus of whispers, dozens of voices overlapping, pleading, accusing. "Why did you leave us? We're still here. It hurts, it hurts." I crawled forward, desperate to get away, but the tunnel seemed to stretch on forever. The walls closed in, the ceiling pressing down. I felt hands brushing against my arms, cold and clammy, pulling at my clothes. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a small chamber. My flashlight caught the glint of something on the far wall, old mining helmets, dozens of them, arranged in a circle. In the center was a pile of bones, tangled together, some still wearing scraps of rotted clothing. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a storm. I could see faces in the darkness, gaunt, hollow-eyed, mouths open in silent screams. One of the faces stepped forward, more solid than the rest. He looked young, maybe 20, with coal-black hair and a jagged scar across his cheek. His eyes locked on mine, full of pain and accusation. "You hear us now," he said, his voice echoing in my head. "You see what they did." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry, I didn't know, I didn't." "They left us here," he whispered. "The company sealed the shaft, said it was too dangerous to dig us out. We screamed for days, no one came." The other voices joined in, a cacophony of grief and rage. I felt their pain, their terror, as if it were my own. The walls seemed to pulse with their suffering. "Please," I begged, "what do you want from me?" The young man stepped closer, his face inches from mine. "Tell them, tell the world what happened here. Don't let them forget us." The chamber began to shake, dust raining down from the ceiling. The whispers rose to a scream, so loud I thought my head would split open. I stumbled back, tripping over the bones, scrambling for the tunnel. I ran, blind with terror, the screams chasing me through the darkness. My flashlight died, plunging me into blackness. I clawed my way forward, feeling the walls close in, the hands grabbing at me, trying to pull me back. At last I saw a faint light, the shaft above, the rope dangling down. I lunged for it, hauling myself up, my muscles burning. The screams faded as I climbed, replaced by a deep, mournful wail that seemed to shake the earth itself. I burst out of the shaft, collapsing on the ground, gasping for air. The woods were silent, the sky streaked with lightning. I lay there for a long time, too scared to move. When I finally got to my feet, I found my recorder lying by the edge of the shaft. I played it back, hands shaking. At first there was nothing but static. Then faintly the sound of voices, screaming, pleading, begging for help. I took the recording to my boss, to the company, to anyone who would listen. Most people just laughed, said it was a prank, a trick of the wind. But a few believed me. The company finally sealed the shaft for good, poured concrete over the entrance, posted warning signs. But it wasn't enough. The screams never stopped. People still hear them on stormy nights, echoing through the hills. Some say the spirits of the lost miners are still trapped down there, waiting for someone to remember them, to set them free. I left Fayette County not long after, but the memories followed me. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, I still hear the screaming shaft calling my name. If you ever find yourself near Devil's Backbone after dark, listen closely. You might hear the voices too, and if you do, don't answer. Some things are better left buried. If you ask anyone from the old mining towns along the Kanawha River, they'll tell you Widow's Creek was cursed from the start. The mine there was always trouble, collapses, fires, men going missing. My granddad used to say the creek itself was haunted, that it ran red after every accident. I never believed him, not really. But in the spring of 1991, I worked the last shift at Widow's Creek, and I saw things I'll never forget. I was 24, just a greenhorn, eager to prove myself. The mine was shutting down for good, coal was running out and the company was pulling out. They needed a skeleton crew to finish the last dig and seal the tunnels. I signed up, thinking it'd be easy money. Just a few nights, then I'd be on my way. There were only 6 of us on that final crew. Most of the old-timers had already left, but a few stuck around for the extra pay. There was Big Joe, who'd worked the mine since he was a boy, Curtis, a wiry man with a nervous laugh, and the twins, Dale and Dean, who never went anywhere without each other. The foreman, Mr. Harlan, was a hard man but fair. He kept us moving, even when the work got rough. The first night was uneventful. We worked late, shoring up the last tunnel, hauling out the final carts of coal. The air was thick with dust, and every sound echoed through the empty shafts. It felt strange, knowing we were the last men who'd ever worked those tunnels. After our shift, we sat outside the entrance, smoking and listening to the creek gurgle in the dark. The water was high from spring rains, and the moon cast silver ripples across the surface. Big Joe told stories about the old days, about the time the mine flooded, and men swore they saw faces in the water, reaching up for help. Curtis laughed it off, but the twins just stared at the creek, their faces pale. "You ever hear the crying?" Dale asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What crying?" I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Sometimes, late at night, you hear a woman crying by the water," Dean said. "They say it's the widow looking for her husband. He died in the mine and she never left." Big Joe spat into the dirt. That's just a story. Mines are dangerous, that's all. But that night, as I lay in my bunk in the old company house, I heard it, a soft, mournful wail drifting through the open window. It sounded like a woman crying for someone lost. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, but the sound crawled under my skin, cold and sharp. The next day, the mood was tense. The foreman pushed us hard, wanting to finish before the weekend. We worked deeper into the mine, sealing off old tunnels, knocking down rotten timbers. The air grew colder the farther we went, and the lights flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. Around midnight, we took a break near the main shaft. Curtis was jumpy, glancing over his shoulder every few minutes. "You hear that?" he whispered. We all listened. At first there was nothing, just the drip of water and the distant rumble of the creek. Then faintly I heard it too, a soft sobbing echoing through the tunnels. Big Joe cursed under his breath. "It's just the wind, don't let it get to you." But the crying grew louder, closer. It sounded like it was coming from the old flooded section, the part of the mine that had been closed for years. The twins exchanged a look and Dean shivered. "We shouldn't be here," he muttered. The foreman barked at us to get back to work, but none of us could shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air felt heavy, charged with electricity. My skin prickled, and every shadow seemed to move. Later that night, as we were sealing the last tunnel, the lights went out. Total darkness, so thick I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. Someone cursed, and I heard the twins fumbling for their flashlights. Then from the darkness came a voice, a woman's voice, soft and broken. "Please help me." I felt a cold hand brush my arm and I jerked away, heart pounding. My flashlight flickered on, and for a split second I saw her, a woman in a tattered dress, her hair hanging over her face, standing at the edge of the water. Her eyes met mine, and I felt a wave of grief so strong it nearly knocked me to my knees. The lights snapped back on and she was gone. The others looked shaken, but no one said a word. We finished the shift in silence, sealing the last tunnel and hauling our gear to the surface. The foreman locked the entrance, and we trudged back to the company house, too tired and scared to talk. That night the crying was louder. It echoed through the camp, rising and falling like the creek itself. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of someone mourning deep in the night. The next day was our last. We were supposed to seal the main shaft and leave for good. The mood was grim, everyone on edge. The foreman handed out our pay, and we packed our things, ready to go. But as we gathered by the creek for one last smoke, we saw something that made my blood run cold. The water was running red, just like my granddad said. It looked like blood, swirling in the current, staining the rocks. Big Joe crossed himself and the twins backed away, faces white as chalk. Curtis started to cry, mumbling prayers under his breath. The foreman tried to calm us, but none of us wanted to go back in that mine. He finally agreed to seal the shaft himself, saying we could wait by the trucks. We watched as he disappeared into the darkness, the heavy door clanging shut behind him. Minutes passed, then an hour. The crying from the creek grew louder, almost frantic. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and headed for the mine, the others trailing behind me. Inside, the air was freezing and the lights flickered. We called the foreman's name, but there was no answer. The crying echoed through the tunnels, leading us deeper and deeper. At the edge of the flooded section, we found him, kneeling in the water, staring at something only he could see. The woman was there, her hand on his shoulder, her face twisted with sorrow. She looked up at us, her eyes hollow and endless. "He's staying with me," she whispered. The foreman didn't move. The water rose around him, swirling red, pulling him under. We ran, stumbling through the darkness, the woman's cries chasing us all the way to the surface. We burst out of the mine, gasping for air, our boots slipping in the mud by the creek. The sky was just starting to lighten, but the world felt colder, emptier. The crying from the water faded, replaced by the rush of the swollen creek and the pounding of our hearts. No one spoke as we stood there staring at the mine entrance. The heavy steel door was shut tight, but it felt like something was watching us from the darkness beyond. Curtis was shaking so bad he dropped his flashlight. The twins clung to each other, eyes wide and wild. Big Joe just stared at the water, his lips moving in a silent prayer. I wanted to run, to leave Widow's Creek behind and never look back, but I couldn't move. My legs felt rooted to the ground, as if the earth itself was holding me in place. Finally, Big Joe broke the silence. "We have to go," he said, his voice rough. "Ain't nothing left for us here." We loaded our gear into the trucks, hands trembling. As we pulled away, I looked back one last time. The creek was calm now, the water clear as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. I could still feel the weight of those hollow eyes, the cold touch of her hand. We drove in silence, the road winding through the hills. No one spoke about what we'd seen. It was like we'd all agreed, without saying a word, to leave the story behind with the mine. But the story didn't leave us. A week later, I got a call from Curtis. He'd been having nightmares, dreams of the woman by the water, her voice echoing in his head. "She keeps calling me," he whispered. "She says I have to come back." I tried to comfort him, but I could hear the fear in his voice. He wasn't the only one. The twins moved away, changed their names, tried to start over. Big Joe stopped talking about the mine altogether, and when I saw him in town, he looked like he'd aged 10 years in a month. As for me, I left West Virginia, took a job in Ohio, tried to forget. But some nights when the wind is just right, I hear the crying again, soft and mournful, drifting through the darkness. I see her face in my dreams, pale and wet, her eyes searching for someone to stay with her in the cold water. They never found the foreman's body. The company sealed the mine for good, poured concrete over the entrance, posted warning signs. But the locals still avoid Widow's Creek, especially after dark. They say the water runs red every spring, and if you listen close, you can hear a woman crying for her lost love. I don't know what really happened in that mine. Maybe it was just the weight of all those years, all those lives lost to the darkness. Maybe the land remembers, even when we try to forget. All I know is I'll never go back. Not for any amount of money, not for anything. If you ever find yourself near Widow's Creek and you hear someone crying by the water, don't stop. Don't look back. And whatever you do, don't follow the sound into the dark. Some things are meant to stay buried. Thank you for joining me on this chilling journey through the haunted coal camps of West Virginia. From the whispers in Black Hollow to the Lantern Man's warning, the screams beneath Devil's Backbone, and the sorrowful spirit at Widow's Creek, these stories remind us that some places never forget and never forgive. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, the shadows of the past linger in these hills, waiting for someone to listen. Which story haunted you the most? Let me know in the comments below. And if you crave more true horror from the darkest corners of America, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Until next time, stay safe and beware the things that wait in the dark.